a few words of thanks before we get started here tonight. Thank you so much to the university, to the Reynolds School of Journalism, and the Reno Gazette Journal, especially alum Brian Dugan, for partnering with us to make this event happen here on campus tonight. And I wanted to explain quickly why HuffPost is here in Reno. So last year we did a 7-week project called Listen to America, which you see up here on our backdrop. We spent 7 weeks traveling across the country. We went to 25 small and mid-sized cities and interviewed over 1,700 people about the issues that matter to them where they live. We weren't talking national politics. We were getting very local and hearing from people firsthand about what matters to them in their communities. We also partnered with local news organizations on that effort and did events like this in almost every location we visited last year. So this year we're on a shorter version of that same tour. We're out for 2 weeks. We're traveling through a handful of western states. Reno's our third stop, sorry. We were in San Diego on Saturday, in Sacramento on Monday, and tomorrow we go to Boise. And we'll be doing events like this in each place we go. Which leads me to the postcards you were given. Lots of you probably already filled them out. If you didn't get one, we're happy to give you postcards at the end of this, but we're doing a project about affordable housing across the country. It was a thing we heard almost every place we visited last year. Every place has a housing crisis. It is something that unites everyone across this country, and we don't talk about it that often. So we're trying to hear from people through these postcards about their personal experiences. And if you have a couple minutes, just please fill out a postcard. It'll help us out with our project. But we're here tonight to talk about women in politics, and especially here in Nevada, where women have been leading the way. We'll introduce our panel in just a minute, but first we'll have a quick introduction from 2 amazing young women who are both students here at the university in the Reynolds School of Journalism. Hannah Jackson is a 4th-year student studying journalism and political science. She currently serves as the president of the Associated Students of the University of Nevada at Reno, the student government on campus. Madeline Perdue is a senior studying journalism and Holocaust, genocide, and peace studies. She is the editor-in-chief of the Nevada Sagebrush, the student newspaper. Please welcome them to the stage, and thanks again, and to our partners. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you all for being here. I think for Maddie and I, in both of our fields, both politics and journalism, representation of women has always been a key issue.
Yeah, absolutely. In the journalism side of things, Poynter put out an article in 2017 that said 2/3 of the graduates coming out of the journalism schools in this country are women, but only 1/3 of the media industry right now is women, and the representation of women of color is far less in the media.
And in politics, only 20% of our Congress is made up of women. And now this isn't just a trend on the national level, it's also a trend on the state level, the local level, and even as local as the university here. For example, out of the 120-year history of ASUN, I'm only the 7th elected female president.
Yeah, and the Sagebrush is celebrating its 125th year, and I'm only the 13th female editor. In our roles, it's incredibly important for us not only to set an example, but to empower women and encourage women to get involved.
So this last fall, we hosted our first Elect Her workshop, which was a half-day workshop totally dedicated to helping women find the tools and resources that they need in order to run for office. We even had an awesome community panel that had a lot of the women that are sitting in the audience right here and even on this panel, which was so inspiring to our students. The impact of that, we had more people running for office, more women running for office, and more women actually winning elected office.
And I was fortunate enough to attend Elect Her, and even though I wasn't inspired to run for political office, it brought to the attention the issue representation in micro level in the Sagebrush. And I looked around the newsroom and I saw men. I saw a lot of them. And that's when I really said, I need to do something about this. So I approached the editor of the magazine on campus, who is a female. Her name is Andrea. And together we created a workshop similar to Elect Her called Creating Her Story. Her story Assembly was focused on empowering female students to get involved in student media and thus the media industry after graduation. We provided workshops on negotiation, workplace barriers, and ally training.
And both Maddie and I are super excited to keep on continuing these efforts, and we hope that even after we're gone that they'll be continued as well. And in pursuing them, we've been really inspired by the female leaders in our community, again, a lot of them that are sitting on this panel and in the audience. And we're really, really excited to hear them tonight, and really even more excited that Nevada has the possibility of becoming the first majority female legislature in the United States.
Absolutely. Representation is important because the future is absolutely female, and empowered women empower women. So I'm going to hand it over to Amanda to introduce the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And feel free to come and sit down in the front. It's plenty of open seats down here. So thank you to our panelists. I wanted to introduce everyone quickly, although I'm sure they are familiar to you. So on the far end, we have Teresa Benitez Thompson, who is the majority floor leader in the Assembly. Next to her, we have Sue Wagner, who of course was the first female lieutenant governor in the state of Nevada. Next to her, we have Marcia Burke-Bigler, who is on the Washoe County Commission. And I believe the county commission is majority female as well, right? And then next to me, I have Anjanette Damon, who is a government watchdog reporter at the Reno Gazette Journal. So thank you all for being here. Oh, and I am, sorry, introduce myself. I'm Amanda Turkle, and I'm Washington Bureau Chief at HuffPost, and I focus on politics. So it's exciting to be here in Nevada because you guys, when I first learned that Nevada could be the first female majority legislature, first of all, I couldn't believe that had never happened. And I also wanted to sort of just see why Nevada, what you guys are doing here that's going well. So I wanted to give it over to you right now, Anjanette, to talk a little bit about the makeup of the legislature and what the chances are that women could be in the majority.
Well, first, thank you very much for inviting us. Thanks to the Reno Gazette Journal and HuffPost and the university. Nevada is kind of a state of contradictions, right? You wouldn't necessarily think this western state who's, pretty well known for the good old boys club, yes, at all levels of business and government, might be in this position to have the first female majority legislature. We've had a lot of success in recent years. It's a female majority Washoe County Commission. It's a female majority Reno City Council. But there's still some of those glass ceilings that have yet to be broken here. I think we have a Sparks City Councilwoman in the audience. She's the lone woman on that council. There's not been a female mayor in Sparks. We just elected our first female U.S. Senator 2 years ago. We have yet to elect a female governor. So yeah, we're a state of contradictions. As far as the legislature is concerned, we've had these, ups and downs, and, Sue's definitely going to be able to talk about this. In the 90s that we had a strong contingent of female trailblazers. I don't cover the legislature anymore, but some of the sessions that I did, we would have like one female Republican assembly member. There's always been a strong contingent, I think, of female Democrats, and when the Democrats have control of the legislature, they've really promoted the female leadership there. Also in the Senate side, the Senator Dina Titus was a powerhouse. As we're heading into this election, it's exciting, I think, for the number of female candidates that are out there. I'm going to have to check my notes because these numbers are all running around in my head from this afternoon. But it's a 63-member legislature. Right now, there's 38 men, 25 women. When you look at the political landscape, and I'm borrowing on my colleague James DeHaven's reporting here, women are favored to win 27 seats. So you either have women who are incumbents, maybe don't face strong opposition because the makeup of their districts, or you have races where there's only female contenders. So if you win all 27 seats, favored to win 27 seats, that leaves 5 that need to be won. And those are going to be tough. I mean, we talk a lot about how this could happen, but really the stars have to align perfectly for it to. So there's 5 seats that need to be won that are kind of, I guess you could say, toss-up seats, and I would say they're probably most likely to come from the assembly races. If I can look at my notes here. So we have 1 female incumbent in a kind of a split district, but incumbents generally are favored. We have 2 female Democratic candidates who are running in mostly Republican districts that have a Republican incumbent, and the same switch, so 2 Republican women who are running in mostly Democratic districts or districts that have a Democratic incumbent. So the power of incumbency is really hard to overcome, but also, off-year elections tend to favor Republicans, so that might swing some in favor of the seats. The Senate is probably going to stay majority male. Looking at the landscape, there's 1 seat where a female candidate might have a shot on it. So yeah, stars have to align, but I think the good news for women is there's a lot of women out there running for office right now at all levels. I mean, the same as at the commission level and the city council level.
And so it seems that the atmosphere and the environment is better for women to run now, which is what I was hoping the 3 of you would talk about a little bit. How has it changed since you first started running for office? How much is it better, and sort of what hurdles are still out there?
Well, it has changed considerably. I first ran in 1974, and I was the first young woman to be elected. I was 34 at the time. But the biggest issue was that my kids were 4 and 5. That was the overriding issue in my district. I thought a lot about issues. No one asked me. They wanted to know how I could possibly leave as a mother and go off and leave my children behind to be raised by a father who was often gone on experiments for DRI. They actually wound up pretty well. I won't go into what they're doing now, but one is an attorney and the other one has several master's degrees. So I think they survived having a mother involved in politics pretty well. But when I first ran, women would have coffees in their home because most women were at home. They weren't out working or doing anything else except being a homemaker. And that's what scared women to vote for someone like myself. I actually had more men vote for me in 1974 than women. And I've often thought about that. Why could that possibly have been? I think it was because they felt maybe intimidated a little bit. Maybe they felt they might have to get out of the house and do something themselves if people were doing something different. I also would have to give credit to my first election victory to AAUW. I had 31 precincts. I had 31 women walk with me every single day. They were always there. And I walked it in the primary and the general. In 1972 was the first person that ran for the city council, and she was the first one ever to go knock on doors. And I learned from her how to do that, and people still think it's an awfully good way to meet people, to understand their constituents' concerns. And it's tough when the districts get larger and larger, but an assembly district, it's very doable. I think that being in the legislature at that time, 1975 was my first session, there were 3 women in it, and there were, in the assembly there were 40 members, but there were 3 women. In the Senate, there actually were 3 women, which was very interesting because one of them I never met. I mean, it was kind of like you were in the Senate and you did not slosh around with people down the other end of the hall. The other 2 I knew quite well, Mary Gojek. In fact, Mary Gojek was somebody that really encouraged me to run, even though I was a Republican at the time, and she was a Democrat. But she wanted young women who supported the same kinds of issues that she did, and I was probably the only Republican that did, not just in Nevada, but maybe in the whole country, that supported some, quote, liberal issues such as the Equal Rights Amendment, and I was a pro-choice supporter as well. But it was very different, but It was a great experience. I met lots of wonderful people, and I think that's one of the advantages of going door to door and meeting people.
You know, one of the things that's really interesting about the whole perception of where it's at now, and I actually didn't run the first time until 2012. So I've only been serving for 6 years. I've been chairman twice, though, in that 6-year period. So there's a different perception that women are capable. That was not there when I first became a lobbyist in the state of Nevada. I lobbied the first time in Nevada in 1983. And there was this perception that, what are you doing here? You know, you're a woman, you're not supposed to be here. But I think one of the things that's really helped it and made a big difference is because women do lots of different things now. How many women are enrolled in engineering school, for instance, who were not enrolled in engineering school back in the 80s and the 70s and 80s? And how many women go to medical school now that didn't do that before? In fact, if you look at the new crop of doctors coming into Reno now, the percentages are more women than men. And so I think women are doing lots of things that are different, that were not things that were done back when Sue and I first got into this business of politics. But one of the things is that women are more likely to run in a state that's a part-time legislature like we are. And all studies show that. And I think the reason is that because women are largely much better at multitasking than men. Not that men can't multitask, but that they generally don't multitask. They're not accustomed to taking care of the children and, you know, working a part-time job as a waitress or whatever, all of those different kinds of things. And so I think women are really much more effective at doing that. And that's probably why in a state like Nevada, we have the chance of having a real opportunity to have a majority women legislature.
Sue, you dropped your paper, so I picked it up, and I see your note here. It says, Teresa Benitez Thompson is my favorite politician ever. I just wanted to make sure that, thank you for that.
It was scratched out, though.
I have to say, Sue's been a big mentor in my life because when I was a student here at the University of Nevada, Reno, and I was studying political science, she was in charge of the legislative internship program. So when I was an intern down at the legislature, she made sure that I got placed with Assemblywoman Jan Evans, who was then head of the Ways and Means Committee. So I had an amazing experience being an intern down at the legislature because Sue kind of set me up on a trajectory that gave me a lot of insight into budget information and how things work, and got to meet with her every week during that experience. So I'm always appreciative of that and for the role that you play as the mentor in my life. So much has changed because my experience was very different than Ms. Wagner's experience. During my second session, I was able to chair the Government Affairs Committee. We had a female speaker then, Speaker Kirkpatrick, and we ended up expecting our third child. And I think because the speaker was, I want to say Marilyn. I don't want to say because it was a woman over a female, but I think because Marilyn herself had a large family and a number of kids and was always taking care of other people's kids. When I looked at her, I said, I'm happy to chair a committee, but you should know I've got this due date, and I'm going to be having a baby in April, so if you don't want to make me a chairwoman, I understand that, and I get that. And she, off the cuff, said, you know, we're women, we multitask. You're going to do just fine. That was the end of the conversation. It was never spoken about again in terms of logistics or any hemming or hawing or maybe not. Let me get back to you. She put an exclamation point. The issue was put to rest. And only she and I knew my due date that session. It happened to be committee first house passage, which is when each house is pass all the respective bills, and if you don't pass the bills, they will die there. So it's kind of a big deal, and she held my secret, and we were able to get through that session just fine. And I know that wouldn't have been possible if it had been probably another speaker who didn't go, no, that's not a problem. We can do 5 things. We do that all the time. That's just kind of what we do. If you weren't doing 10 things at the legislature, you'd be doing 10 things with your job, or 10 things at home, or a combination of both. So just a very different kind of experience nowadays, because all of the candidates that are running come with family life involved, and I feel that the legislature, even the men, a previous session, an assemblyman from, Republican assemblyman from Las Vegas, and I became friends, Assemblyman Gardner, because he had 4 children, all very young like me, and he had them up, and they were doing laps in the hallways and chair races. Perhaps it got out of hand, but even last session, Assemblyman Watkins had his 2 children, and they moved up here from Vegas. So, you know, in the evening hours after 5 o'clock, there's lots of family activity, I think, happening in the hallways, and I think it makes for a much more conducive type of atmosphere and probably a very different type of nightlife than Carson City in previous legislative sessions of the old Mad Men days would looked like.
Have the policies had to change in the legislature over the years to accommodate families more, and is there more that needs to be done?
I think that they're mostly unspoken rules. I don't believe there's any official Senate rule, standing rules, or Assembly standing rules that speak to that. I think it's just more about the type of decorum that you allow. I think we're more sensitive to people's hours and sensitive to family life and family demands, and that we still get work done despite that. And it's not just the women that are there. You know, a lot of men are equal parents nowadays, and they're the ones demanding that they want to be able to get to a soccer game at least once during session, as much as the moms are. So, I don't think it's anything official. It's been very much, I think, just a change of the times coming into the legislature.
I would like to comment on 2 things that have been said. One is the part-time aspect of it that Marcia mentioned. That was something I sold my family on, that this is only going to be every other year, kids and dad. I'm not going to be gone all the time. As it turned out, you're gone a lot more, and it's been increasing where they have interim committees now that meet all the time. At the time I was on, when I first got elected, there were not that many, but there were all kinds of events, and even if it wasn't in your exact assembly district, I felt a commitment to go, just because someone didn't live within the marked lines of Assembly District 15, I think it was. But needless to say, as the session got longer, I did have to stay down, particularly when I chaired the Judiciary Committee in the Senate. I was the first woman and the first non-lawyer to do that. And so I think something, I was gonna say I worked very hard. I think that's something that women did all the time, today and yesterday. They work very hard because they want to leave a good image for other women to run, for their constituents to think, hey, they did a great job, maybe we can take a chance on 2 of them rather than just 1. I think that's an important part, that it is part-time, although it's really not. But when my kids, I asked my whole family to vote whether I should run or not. And my kids thought they were supposed to raise their hand at 4 and 5. They didn't know what they were raising their hands for. And in fact, my daughter said the other night at a KNPB dinner that she remembered going around. My husband made all my campaign signs. I only had 18 of them because they were handmade. And I went around in the February of the year the election was, in that former November, and asked people on good spots if I could have put up a sign there. And they were very impressed that I'd come around in February in the snow, and then I went back and made sure that they were still living there in the same house and that they were still agreeable. I think that my daughter was saying that she was assigned one time to go around and wipe mustaches off some of my signs. So she said to this day, I was involved. Not exactly the way she thought, but she was involved.
Well, and it's interesting, you know, because the commission is also part-time in theory. And I'm sure the city councils are part-time in theory. When I first decided that I was thinking seriously about running for the county commission, and that it was going to be an open seat because the person who held it before me, there had never been a woman in this seat, by the way, it was always men, and the person who held it before me had decided he was not going to run, and so it was an open seat. And so I went around and talked to some of the people I knew who were, you know, intimately connected with the commission, and how many hours is this? So what are we talking about? Because I ran a full-time business. I was working at the same time, and they said, 30 hours a week. I work average 60, most weeks 70 to 80 hours every week. And so don't believe that part-time rule. I did say that, but it's really not actually the number of hours you work, because you have so many other things to do. From the commission's perspective, you not only sit on the commission as a commissioner, but you also sit on 9 other boards. So in my case, because I have Lake Tahoe in my district, I also sit on the Tahoe Regional Planning Commission. I sit on the Tahoe Transportation Committee. I sit on the Nevada Tahoe Environmental Committee, where we worry about whether or not we're going to protect our beautiful lake and bring it back to the depth of clarity that it used to have. Plus, I sit on the regional governing board with a number of people, and all of us are working really hard on those. So those are all at least 1 meeting a month or 1 meeting every other month. And so in addition to your commission, in our case, we meet 3 times a month. I'm also chair of the fire board, the Truckee Meadows Fire Board. And so there's this huge list of things that you have to do. And trust me, there's no way to know all of that without a great deal of reading documents and studying. And the legislators, I always, as a lobbyist, I was always fascinated with how they could know everything they needed to know about those bills, because there are so many of them, and they're coming at you like you're drinking from a fire hose. So it's a fascinating business to be in, but a lot of fun and very interesting.
So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about why representation matters. You know, you sometimes hear that, you know, it doesn't really matter if it's a man or a woman as long as they're of the political party that you want. That's more important. So in your experience, you know, what effect does gender equality have on governing?
I would like to speak to that, particularly because there's somebody in the audience that I'm going to mention. When Julia Ratty first ran for the Senate, she took another woman's spot because unfortunately that senator had died. When I first met her, she told me she was, at least I got the feeling, maybe she didn't exactly tell me, but I got the feeling. She also worked for the Girl Scouts at that time. And the Smith family, Debbie Smith was the senator who had passed away. They came to her and asked her to run. And Julia felt she didn't really want to, but she felt that she would be not demonstrating leadership to all the Girl Scouts that she was representing and that she was working for. I was concerned that she was only going to fill out that half a term and not run again. Well, I think once she got there and learned how influential women could be, how women played a real role in crafting legislation that affected women in a different way possibly than men, I think she realized, and she's running again, that that women do make a significant difference. And so I'm very glad that both Teresa and Julia are running again, and I particularly remember that conversation.
I think the first big hurdle that we have to get to is the parity, is getting at least 50% of the legislature to be to have women, because we just have to hit that milestone. It's something that we ought to do, we need to do, that it's important. But once we get there, or even if we get close to there, the next big step is making sure that we are present in every conversation that happens that's relegated to decision making, and that it's not just about electing women for women's sake, but it's about changing the process, changing the discussion, the tone and the textures, the type of questions that might be asked during the public hearing process, the type of suggestions that are coming in with amendments. It's, to me, I get excited about this prospect because I don't think it's just what happens on election night and celebrating, yes, we did this, we got this done, and we are at parity in one way, but then really seeing it through to know that it's going to change the whole process. Hopefully it will change the way that we do business, and that's what I get excited about. And I don't know exactly how. I would love to be, 10 years out, looking back and going, wow, I never thought that would have happened, but that's great. I never would have guessed that. But I know that the entire process, front to end, and all the thousands of little things that happen for a bill to become law, will be impacted. Hopefully, like I said, in tone and texture and conversation and decision points in leadership and all of that.
I think that happened last session.
Yeah, it did. And you know, the other thing is, I think it's really important for women to realize that they make a difference in a lot of leadership areas simply because they have a vested interest in some of the things that don't necessarily get seen at the legislature or talked about at the legislature. My history at the legislature was that when I first started there, most of the deals on the budgets and most of the deals on the big bills that came around were cut in the men's room. I'm serious.
Or in Bill Raggio's office.
Or in Senator Raggio's office, where you weren't allowed to be if you were a female and the deals were being cut. And so even as a lobbyist who represented medical interests, who represented mining interests, who represented engineering and a lot of some minor gaming things, but a lot of the things that were very important to the state of Nevada, even as in that position, one of the men who also represented it would go in instead of me getting to go in and cut the deal. So I think really you're absolutely right. Both of these ladies are absolutely right in what they're saying, in that things are different today because women really get involved. We make a difference because we stand up and say, okay, I'm going to be involved in this, so let me tell you what I know. And, you know, we are 50% of the population of this country, and therefore we should have 50% of the vested interest in what's going on. And I think women like Sue Loudon, she was a good senator, by the way, but like Sue Wagner, really leave all of us, the women who want to be involved in politics and want to be involved in leadership. She set such a great example for all of us, and she was so good about, you know, shepherding us on our way, sometimes with a harsh tone of, what are you thinking? But she did it, and she was great, very great for all of us. And so it was a good experience, I think, and I appreciate all the things I learned from her.
If I might jump in too, I think the parity issue is key because everybody has a different life experience, whether you're male or female, you're young or old, you're white, black, Hispanic, and there's a human tendency to listen or identify more with people who share some of those same life experiences as you do. So if you have a policy-making body that only looks like one kind of segment of the population, is not necessarily understanding how a law or a policy might affect a broader swath of individuals. And you know, and there's to say necessarily that a female legislature is going to treat specific issues differently or have a different personality. I mean, I don't know that that's true. You might, you know, and this is kind of a difficult example to bring up, but you know, there was a lawmaker who had bad behaviors towards women, assaulting women, sexually harassing women. There was a female in charge of the assembly at the time that he started this behavior. He lost a chairmanship. It was never brought out really into the public. It just really wasn't dealt with. It wasn't until he was a senator and there was male leadership, and the male leadership dealt with it. So, you know, you don't want to fall into these like stereotypical buckets that, you know, women will act one way and men act one way. But that parity and that representation of different life experiences, I think, is where you get.
You know, one time I taught a class on women in leadership at the university before I had the internship program, and there was definite difference in how women lead than men. It's just the books I had the students read were instrumental in teaching them something that women tend to be more inclusive. They want to hear different ideas, and I think they're more interested in compromise. Unfortunately, people today, particularly in DC, think that's a dirty word, but it really isn't. I really think serving in the executive branch and the legislative branch, I think really I enjoyed the legislative experience more because you could bring diverse points of view into a product, i.e. the bill or hopefully the law.
I had a thought, and I think this would be interesting. I don't know that this data exists, but when I talk about kind of changing the tone and texture, I thought that's kind of abstract. But like if you think about it this way, there are 63 legislators, and there's about 600 registered lobbyists, about 500 of which are paid. And so like I think when we, if there's students out here looking for a grad project or someone who has to work on statistics or anything, I would love to see, like, because they all have to register, so you have to know their name and everything like that. But like, my thought is that it's been a long time since I've had like lobbyist industry representatives say they want to come meet with me, and I get 5 gentlemen who sit down in front of me. There's always a woman in the group, or it's always usually now a man and a woman paired together. But I've always thought, you know, I wonder if that effect has spread out, that when we had our first female speaker, Barbara Buckley, how did the rest of the building respond to that? And how did industries that want to talk to us respond to that? Did they realize that we weren't going, things needed to shift in a different way? And I think it'd be actually really interesting to look and see if that kind of ripple effect happened, if there were more women employed in the lobbyist and the special interest roles who come to talk with us, and as there's more women. I've thought the same thing, because in 2010 election, in which was my first election that I ran and won, it was the first time that we elected Latinas to the Nevada State Assembly and an African American woman to the Nevada State Assembly. We'd had one in the Senate, but not in the Assembly. That's Assemblywoman Dina Neal. And there were 4 of us, Latinas, that came in together. And now I see more people of color that are in the industry and lobby corps. And I think, as you see, you know, very famously last session, we had people of color in the top leadership spots in the Senate and the Assembly, and even our governor. And I thought, anyone who has 2 cents of, you know, wits about them would look and say, we should make sure that everything is changing along with that. That if the people who go out to vote are saying, this is what we want our electeds to be representative of us in this way, in this wonderful diversity, that all those different types of places, all those different types of people we interact with would also change as well, and state government and the lobby corps and all of that. I think that'd be interesting.
I will say that that ripple effect that you're talking about, you saw it a little bit in the media when political representation changes. I know that when Obama became president, you saw more media organizations start to hire black reporters. And then when Hillary was the Democratic nominee and people thought she was going to win, you saw media organizations bringing on a lot more women in prominent positions. So anecdotally, I've seen that. So I would love to hear from you, you know, when you talk to women or try to recruit women to run, what are some of their concerns still about running, if there are any? Or are they, you know, since 2016 or whatever, are they a lot more enthusiastic about doing so?
I spend a lot of time talking to women, especially this year as chair of the commission and not up for election. I have spent a lot of time talking to women who are running and who are thinking about running. And it's interesting that they now ask the same kinds of questions that anyone else would ask, any man had asked. Because I, as a lobbyist for years and years, I also did campaigns. And so they ask the same kind of questions. How many hours is it going to be? What are the major issues? And how do I educate myself on those major issues? And the thing I really like about it is they are really good at signifying and dignifying what their major reason for running is. And I think that that's a difference that I see from when I was doing campaigns before, is that if you talk to a woman about, why don't you run for the seat? You'd be really great, and it'll be a lot of fun. It'll be very interesting, and you'll do this and you'll do that. And then they didn't say, well, why? It would be, well, why? Now I don't see women saying that. I see women saying, well, I think I could do a good job, but I'm worried about this particular issue, and I know it's an issue that needs to be addressed at the legislature, or it's an issue that needs to be addressed at the city council or at the county commission level. And so I'm really happy to see that change, that I think from my experience as a lobbyist over the years and dealing with campaigns has really come around.
I think the first question any of us should ask if somebody says, I'd like to run for something, why? Why do you want to run? I asked a young man who wanted to run for the city council, and he said, because I'm so-and-so, his name. Well, clearly, that's not a very good reason. I mean, he just wanted to be known by more people. Not a good reason. Needless to say, he came in last, as well he should have. But I think asking somebody why they want to run is very important. I remember in '74, Richard Nixon was president. The Watergate hearings were going on at the exact time I was running. One of the major reasons I ran is I didn't want to think, I didn't want people to think all Republicans were liars, cheaters.
I still don't want them to think that.
Well, I would agree, but I'm not a Republican anymore, so. You know, when people would ask me about the Equal Rights Amendment, they'd say ERA, I said, because I'm a big Boston Red Sox fan in addition to being interested in politics, and I'd always think of ERA, earned run average, so we'd talk about baseball a little bit if I figured that person was not going to be supportive of the Equal Rights Amendment. You can get away, you know, I think a candidate should have a little fun, have a good sense of humor, because people don't want everybody to be so totally serious all the time.
The other thing is that as an example of I think what Therese was talking about with people of color, that's the other thing that I found that is really interesting is that it used to be if you talk to somebody who, whether they were male or female, who they were not white, you know, white, as we say in my family, because we're all pale-skinned redheads, and so if you weren't that, and they would be, well, what are people going to think about? But I found it interesting when I was walking door to door, that women who were Hispanic, women who were Asian, they were as connected and many times knew way more about what was going on in the community than, you know, some of the other people that we talked to. And so that was, I think, really enlightening for me, and I'm glad to see that.
I tried to get a Native American to run for office this year. She's in the audience right now, I see her. But she told me that's the last thing she wanted to do. She liked to work behind the scenes, so instead of running for office, I've got her involved in speaking engagements, the Women's Lobby. I got her on the board of Channel 5, KNPB, because I want to mentor women in any way that I possibly can, that I'm able to, that I have an effect on.
So in DC, we have been obsessed with the Brett Kavanaugh hearings over the past few weeks. And obviously after Anita Hill testified in 1991, you know, a record number of women ran for Congress in '92, and it was the year of the woman. What effect do you think the Kavanaugh hearings will have on women running for office or coming out to vote?
Women will come out to vote. They will. Women will come out to vote because it's so close to the election that I think you will see women out voting because they feel like perhaps Congress is not listening to their concerns.
Will it benefit Democrats or Republicans?
They are not listening. I mean, that was clear in my mind. When they hired a woman prosecutor from Arizona, so it didn't look like all white men, old white men, sitting behind them.
The key is old white men.
The key is old white men. 3 words. But when you hire a prosecutor who wasn't all that good to ask questions, you're abrogating your responsibility, and I totally agree that you're going to have women come out and vote. I hope they do. Vote, vote, vote. That's the only way you can change government in this country in a reasonable, non-revolutionary way.
I really hope that that begs the diligent work that needs to be done to change what is the process. And I don't think that anything in America could have played out worse than what happened with those hearings. It's every victim's worst nightmare, that the whole world will point at you and call you a liar, no one will believe you. And it's every accused's worst nightmare, that the whole world will point at you and never believe you. And the process was just ghastly. The process was horrible. I was sitting there watching it thinking, this is the wrong way to ever handle these kind of things, to have those kind of conversations that were happening, and it was so uncomfortable watching it. I had to get up and walk away a number of times just because I was like, this is humanity at its worst. And I know that one thing we've been doing at the Nevada State Legislature that we said is, how do we try to create a process where when a person feels unsafe and they feel like they're being harassed or something has occurred, and it's not the criminal level, but it's all those thousands of things that exist right below the criminal level. How do we handle that in the building? How do we create a path by which people can come forward? How do we create a system that can give us a decision about something that's happened? Because we've done it, we've handled it just as bad in the past, and as Ann Jeanette pointed out, we had members acting badly for decades, and no one knew what to do. The people elected him, the people put him there. So how do we fix the situation? How do we handle the situation? So one of the things that we did is we set up through the legislature website and a phone line, and we said we have to make this non-political. It cannot, the decision about who's right or wrong, the decision about did something happen or not, or is there a there, what is there, can't be handed by politicians. It can't be handed by us that are elected. Don't put that on my lap. I am no way trained to make that decision. I am no way trained to make that determination. And so we hired an independent law firm where those accusations would go, and that they would do the footwork and make the determination. Because in the legislative building, there's a lot of fear that there's always going to be political reprisal, either way, and in thousands of ways. So we thought, we have to make that process not political. We have to have some way to have a third party that isn't the Speaker of the House or the majority leader in the Senate making these decisions and carry out an investigation. So I was at a majority leader conference this past summer, and lots of legislatures having this conversation. What kind of rules are we going to put in place? Do we have rules that don't allow for fraternization? Do we have rules where we censure members? Do we have rules where we can remove people from their committees and their posts? And legally, how much can we do? So I know other state legislatures are talking in a way to say, how do we create a fair process? How do we create something that doesn't become a political monster? Because in the end, no one is served by that.
In Congress, a bill has been trying to get through now forever to deal with sexual assault, sexual abuse within the confines of Congress. Jackie Spears, who's a congresswoman from California, is behind this. It has been stalled. It still has not passed. And I think, getting back to the Kavanaugh hearing, I think that right away, after the election, there should be a process set up as to what happens when this situation, because Anita Hill said it herself just recently, that there is no process. Should there be an FBI investigation? How long should it go on? Who they should investigate? Who they should ask? This should all be done now, because it's not going to be the last time.
Right, to take it out of the hands of whoever happens to be in power.
I mean, and it's a problem at every level. When you talk about how greater parity might change Carson City is not always a safe place for young women or medium-aged women or older women. I mean, there can be a Carnival Cruise atmosphere. You have a lot of lawmakers that are up from Vegas, away from their families. You have lobbyists who are trying to wine and dine everyone. And all of this has really flown under the radar screen for a long time. Politicians, elected officials don't always like to pass things that, rules on themselves at every level. But, at the commission had to deal with a member that was accused of sexually harassing a staff member, and there wasn't really a policy in place for that. The city of Reno had the city manager who was accused of sexual harassment, and those investigations were handled very clumsily because there was no policy in place. Do you tell the council? Does the council want to get involved? Who is the city manager's boss? How do you deal with that? So the more that these kinds of policies and procedures can be codified, publicized, and so you have a process, I think that will go a long way to making these places more safe for women.
I agree with that, and one of the things that I think, why I think more women will come out to vote after the hearings, the Kavanaugh hearings, is because of the very bill that Sue was talking about. That bill has been stalled in Congress for 10 years, maybe not that long, but a considerable period of time, at least 6 years it's been stalled in Congress. Why? Why? I mean, that's a simple question. Why? Why is that not an issue that's very, very important? And I think the other factor that I think adds to the women will come out to vote is exactly what Sue said about the old white men. And, I mean, some of them are nice people. I know them, a couple of them pretty well, and they're nice people. That's not to say that they aren't doing a good job in their position. But are they really, truly listening to America, to the America of today, or are they listening to the America of when they first got elected, or 10 years ago, or 20 years ago? The America of today is vastly different than it was when they got elected.
I'll have one more quick Kavanaugh question, then we're going to open it up to the audience, so get your questions ready. Senator Heller made some national news when he said that the Christine Blasey Ford allegations were a hiccup in Brett Kavanaugh's way to confirmation. Do you think that'll hurt him with female voters in November?
Well, I will admit up front, I'm supporting Jackie Rosen, so I will say that right away. A hiccup was a terrible thing to say about what happened, and I'm not sure it's going to make any difference.
I'm not sure it'll make any difference either, and I'm supporting Heller because he's a friend of mine, and so, you
Well,
do
Heller's
that.
a friend of mine too, but I'm not.
But I mean, I think you do that, and so, but I don't know that it will make a difference in that particular race.
Okay, Hillary, do you want to use my mic? Yeah. Okay. So wait for the mic, and then.
So we have about 25 minutes. We have a pretty tight turnaround here, so I would just ask for questions only, not comments. I'm sorry, I've got to keep that rule, and and keep your question clean if you can, because I'm going to hold the mic for you like this, and then I'm going to disappear. So there's not going to be a lot of follow-up, because we want to make sure there's an opportunity. 25 minutes is not a long time. So I'm going to stop talking. Raise your hand if you've got a question.
As women take a more prominent role in government, how will they resist the good old girls club?
There is no good old girls club.
No, there never has been one, to my knowledge. One of the things that's interesting about that is that as women become more active in running for office, partly that's because they've been more active in working for government. So the percentage, I just have these statistics right here, 57% of the people who work for Washoe County, for instance, are women. And we have 2,700 employees. That's a nice percentage of people who are women. And do we have a good old boys or a good old girls club? I don't think we do, even in our employees. I don't see that.
I think it's a legitimate question because, right, absolute power corrupts, absolutely, and I don't think we should assume that every woman that's elected is an angel, right? I've served with some, and I won't name them publicly, but I can tell you they were not angels. I can tell you.
Or they do not believe in the same thing.
We just think different things, and so I've got a coworker who always says, I'm going to soar, and I will start by using my wings, but if you break them, I'll use my broom. So, women will come in and they will have positions of power, and I think it's something that we stay conscious of, that it would be absolute hypocrisy to get there and then create our own glass ceiling. I think anyone in any position of power has to stay cognizant of that and really kind of constantly check themselves. Am I getting too much of a, single-minded thinking? Am I not being open enough? Have I lost the ability to hear the other side of an argument? Have I lost the ability to connect with different people? And so I do think we have to be aware of that. It's human nature.
So no deals in the women's room? Backroom deals?
Oh, good.
I mean, I think it's just, I think I know what you're probably referring to. I've heard it referred to with the city of Reno. Bob Kishel had the Good Old Boys Club, and does Hillary Sheeby have the Good Old Girls Club? And, in Nevada at all levels, I think it's been those who are empower's club. And for many decades, they were just all men. So it's called the Good Old Boys Club. And as women come into office, those relationships will be at play. And do they have relationships built with the powerful men? Do they have relationships with the powerful women? So yeah, as this parity changes, does the parity change in those who have influence over the lawmakers, and does the gender change?
And Jeanette, let me ask you a question. The city council, you have a number of women. They don't always agree on everything, do they?
No, they absolutely do not.
So
No, and
you can't
we don't
see
need-
them as forming a good old girls club.
Right. Yeah, I don't think it necessarily falls on gender lines. It's just who is in power, and now as there are more women who are coming into power, you'll see that, I think, that balance shift. It's just.
Well, I actually think, though, at least from my perspective, and I think I can speak for Teresa on this also. I think from our perspective, I'm the chair of the commission. I spend a lot of time worrying about what the issues that the two men who sit on our commission have to worry about in their own districts. So once you get elected to the commission, you represent Washoe County. You represent the whole group. And that means you represent the issues that are brought by developers who may be predominantly male, or you represent the issues that are brought by, from a wilderness perspective, which we're looking at right now, or an environmental perspective, which we're looking at, which are predominantly women. And so I spend a lot of time myself making sure that I am not focusing on just the one side or the other side. And I think that's also true for Teresa. So perhaps, it's unfair for us to be answering your question. I think your question is valid. Is there any chance that women are going to be better at not playing games than men? No, there's no chance of that. So, we're all humans, so we all.
I remember a former leader of the university here told me once that Barbara Buckley, when she was Speaker of the Assembly, played hardball better than anybody he knew.
She did. I witnessed
So
that myself. She did.
I think that's a compliment to Barbara Buckley, but I'm sure a lot of people would not. When I chaired the Senate Judiciary Committee, I was the only woman, but I was the chair. I let everybody else ask all the questions first. And if there were any questions to be asked, I asked them at the end. So I think I tried to give more than an equitable shot for everybody.
I do that also. So. Oh, come on, it's not fair for Charlene, an elected official, to ask questions.
Hi. Can you address the importance of mentorship and encouraging young women and women in general, and also of us encouraging women across party lines? Because I think we together need to look more importantly at that. But and I know Sue has been a mentor, but can you address how important that is as we're trying to build the amount of women that are holding office and taking leadership positions?
Well, I'm not quite sure. Your question is, how do I mentor people? Or I've gone out and asked people, as I mentioned, to run for office. And if they don't want to, I put them in other positions where they can gain some credibility and be more outspoken, and for people to know more about what they do, particularly Native Americans. I don't think anybody hardly knows much about the Reno Sparks Indian Colony, for example. So I think that's important. I guess your question was about party lines. Since I'm a nonpartisan, I guess that's a good question to ask me. I've never had anybody really that's a Republican, now that I'm not one, come to me and say, but if they did, I'd be certainly very helpful. I think that was your question. I'm not sure. Was it? Oh, I think it's extremely important. I think it's, yeah. Yeah, I think that's very important. I remember an assemblywoman, Joni Lambert, who represented a district that included Verdi. She was a Republican, I was a Republican, and she came to me and asked me if I could help her, and I certainly did. She did a great job in the assembly. Unfortunately, she didn't want to stay there long enough. She served a few terms and then left. But I think mentoring is extremely important. If I would be happy to mentor anybody that knocked on my door or called me, because I think it is important to get younger women or younger people involved.
I totally agree with that, and as Charlene and I have probably talked about this before, but I think younger women, younger men, younger people getting involved is really important. And of course, I've mentored a lot of people, and I work across party lines. I'm one of those ugly rhino type people. I'm really not a Republican in Republican clothing. I only wear half of an elephant's clothes.
Are you just a half a rhino?
Yeah, I'm half a rhino. Yeah, but I'll tell you, I have a granddaughter sitting here in the office. I here in the room right now, and I won't point her out because otherwise she would probably be really angry with me. But from the time she was old enough to start talking, I think one of the first things I taught her was up with women, because not because I'm a feminist, because I'm really not. I'm a person who believes that we need power to women. And so we need to mentor our younger people from the time they're 2 years old. Our younger women need to be mentored to learn that you have a duty, you have a responsibility to your country. The great thing about America is you don't have to agree with what other people say, but they have a right to say it. And you need to mentor them to have a voice. And so I think mentoring is extremely important.
I guess a question for Sue and Marsha in particular, like the Republican Party, what does it need to do to make sure it doesn't lose female voters and gets more women to run for office as Republicans?
Well, since Sue's not a Republican anymore, I'll answer that. They need to really work harder at mentoring women, and we're actually doing a lot more of that than we used to. We really need to develop PACs that are directed at trying to get young women involved, and we need to go talk to classes, and as women, as Republican women, we need to make sure people understand that just because you're a Republican doesn't mean that you think all social programs are bad and that no money, tax dollars should ever go to a social program, because that just simply isn't true. Most Republican women that I know don't feel that way at all. Most Republican women are more like me. We are fiscally responsible and fiscally conservative, but we are socially much more active in the things that are interesting to all of us, the things that are necessary to all of us. Childcare, senior services, the homeless situation. Those are three of the top issues that I work on as a commissioner. And so, and I make no bones about the fact that I think governments don't have money. They have tax dollars that are paid to them because they're a service organization. And so, but those tax dollars need to be focused on the things that are really needed in our country. And that is, we need to do something about homeless. And so from a county perspective, since we are sort of responsible for that, we're working on that. But we really need to worry about senior services. Our seniors who have served us and taken care of us, to have them not have a safe place to live or have a meal. At the county, we feed, we have over 3,000 seniors that we feed every single day. And many of them, that's the only meal they'll get, is the meal they get from us. And so we've actually increased this last year, at the beginning of this year, we increased our Meals on Wheels program to serve 2 meals a day to every person that gets it, because our seniors need food. And there are people out there that really need help. And so I think that's what the Republicans are not doing well. I think they are not talking about the need of the social programs.
And do you worry that, comments by, like the Kavanaugh hearings or, whatever Trump tweets or says, how do you worry that hurts those efforts that you're trying to do at the local level?
I do worry about it, especially Trump. I think that it's interesting because I get a lot of social media from people who are both R's and D's and independents. And so the thing on Kavanaugh is really sort of split down the middle. People who feel that he was a very good judge and he had no negative track record, and people who feel that even if there's a chance that he sexually harassed this woman, that Miss Ford, that he should never be on the Supreme Court. So I've really gotten an interesting, I think it's not split 50-50, but it's pretty close. But I think what the Republicans are doing wrong is that they are not talking, and Trump is one of those people that I'd like to steal his social media equipment from most of the time. But they're not talking about the issues in a respect that they need to be using the right language. So for instance, Dean's comment, Dean Heller, did I turn myself off? Dean Heller's comment about it was a hiccup. That's not language that's appropriate to this day and age and this particular issue. And so I think Republicans would do themselves a favor if they'd educate themselves.
I think if the Republicans had more policies that reached women, if they had more issues that women care about, I guess you're thinking of the issues that you think women care about here in this county. But I think generally speaking, if the Republicans had more issues that women, that appeal to women, they would do better in terms of reaching out and getting Republican women to run. The reason I'm not a Republican anymore, I stayed in it for a very long time because I was always elected as a Republican, and I felt I had a commitment to those people that had elected me. But the Republican Party just became too conservative for me, and that's why I'm a nonpartisan. I'm not a big party person. I wasn't involved in the Republican Party in the legislature, and I don't want to be particularly involved in the Democratic Party. So that's why I'm a nonpartisan. I realize I can't vote in a primary because of that, but in only one instance would that have affected my vote.
Right.
It just, and this is putting the partisan stuff aside. They absolutely have to be electing more women because the numbers are just so lopsided right now. I served during the legislative session where there was one female Republican serving, and she served better and longer than most of the people who were there, and they didn't even have her in leadership, and I can never figure that out. I'm like, they always take a group photo and they hang it up on the wall, and here's this, one woman standing there surrounded by all these suits, and I'm just always like, you can come hang out with us if you want. I know it's got to get lonely sometimes. And then right now, we have Assemblywoman Krasner with us, and I think there's 4 Republican women serving in the Assembly right now. Right, but we have a total of 17. The rest are all on my side of the aisle. And in the Senate, I think there's one Republican. One resigned her seat to go be in charge of the Nevada Gaming Commission. So there was 2, but there's only one in the Senate right now. And the rest of those, the numbers I think is at 6. There's 7 total, so 5. So the other 5 are on the Democratic side of the aisle, and I certainly think that the party, and there will be, I don't mean to sound, I don't know how to say it, but I don't know how much electing a brothel owner on that side of the aisle is going to help or make women feel welcomed. I just don't know how.
I agree. I think you're absolutely right on that. I think that the Republican Party would do themselves a big favor if they not only got issues, paid attention to issues that were more important to women, but they also really worked harder at getting women elected.
I'd like your opinion on something. Our country was not formed with our Congress to be a lifetime job, and we seem to have the good old boys that stay forever. Also, what is your thoughts on that? Shouldn't there be term limits? And the other thing is, what is this with the Supreme Court? It's for life. And to me, that just seems so wrong. I didn't get to vote for Kavanaugh or anybody else, and I really object to that, and I'd like your opinion.
Well, I'll tackle it first. The Supreme Court, there have been some suggestions just recently in should the Supreme Court be for life. There are several proposals that are being floated out that may be depending, because it's become so partisan. Again, you know, if you have a Republican president, you're probably going to get a Republican Supreme Court justice and vice versa. That is a shame. And I think the reason a lot of people did not support Kavanaugh was because of what they saw as his temperament in the hearing before the committee. I think that was an important question. But I think that, I don't know, I haven't really given him much thought, but I think it's worthy of some thought. Should the Supreme Court be for life? Particularly now when it has become clearly, you can count the liberal votes versus the conservative votes. That should not be the way, I don't believe, that the Supreme Court should be. And your other question was about Congress people being elected, should they be term limited? I see both sides of the question. You know, when we had term limits for the legislature, some people would serve in the assembly and then they'd run for the Senate. And so they could kind of go back and forth. I can think of one person from Las Vegas that has done that. But the term limits have pros and cons. The con would be that when they're all gone, and most of them don't run back and forth from different houses, then you don't have an institutional memory. And so lobbyists then become much more important and significant because they can just keep rotating different legislators and they can start all over again. I think that's a problem with term limits, but I also understand why you would want them because there are some people that have been in, I think Orrin Hatch has been in the Senate for forever. I can't remember, but it seems like forever. For a very long time. But he's not running again. But I think he's 86, if I'm not mistaken. But I think term limits have both pros and cons on both sides.
Yeah, I agree, they do. They do have pros and cons. Not only do you have lobbyists who become very powerful, but you also have staff that becomes very powerful because that's where all the institutional memory is at. And then the other thing that happens is you end up doing legislation by initiative petition like in California. So, you know, lots of people in states where they do lots of initiative petitions don't ever even vote for any of those issues anyway. So the only people who vote for them are those people who have a vested interest in that particular issue. And so there's pros and cons to term limits. I agree that maybe Congress has gone over the top with the lack of term limits. And something needs to be done. No question, they're not listening to us.
I also think something needs to be done with gerrymandering.
I was just going to say, I mean, that people are safe.
Go
If
ahead.
they want to be safe, they're safe.
Anjanette, say more about it.
You mentioned that Dean Heller's comment about sexual assault being a hiccup probably wouldn't impact voters this year. So are you working on ways to show women who are so hopeless after these hearings that you are implementing ways, not just with like the Me Too movement or anything like that, but actually in legislation showing women that you are doing something to prevent this from happening again?
Well, let me say that I don't think Dean's comment was relative to the sexual harassment being a hiccup, but rather the whole circus, as Teresa expressed, and I totally agree with her, that was a circus in the way it was done. I actually think that's what he's referring to. I know Dean fairly well, and I don't believe for 1 minute that he thinks sexual harassment is acceptable or ever a hiccup. He's a pretty good guy in that respect. But in answer to your question about what are we doing, I think, you know, that's something that we really have to spend some time talking about, and because there are laws on the books already that prohibit that. There are laws on the books that put people in jail when they sexually harass or rape or whatever. So there are laws on the books. The problem for us, at least at the county level, and maybe this is true at every level, but the problem for us at the county level is how do you enforce those things? How do you prove it's not just he said, she said? And, you know, that's really the issue for us. And so I think we spend a lot of time looking at those issues, but so far, I'm sorry to say we haven't come up with a really good response and a really good way to resolve it.
I imagine that this session will be a very active one. Most legislation that people are working on right now is still remaining confidential, but I would be surprised if we had less than 10 bills addressing changes in the law regarding this. I know there's some good people working on a number of different things, and there's lots of different kinds of conversations that I believe will be had. In the past, Assemblywoman Bustamante Adams successfully brought a bill that expanded statutes of limitations. I believe that was specific. That's so the amount of time that a person's given to report a crime. I think it was specific to children, and when so children who were the victims of molestation, giving them more time to report as they were adults. So we've been able to like come into a better awareness and knowledge, we've been making some progress at the legislature, but I have a feeling that this upcoming session will be, it will be a very meaty conversation, and I am very hopeful that when it's all said and done, that we will see Nevada that has laws that are on the forefront of changing the way that we address and handle some of these. And lots of those things I was talking about that are in the gray, you know, the conversation about what is just harassment versus what is criminal, because that's, you know, there's a lot of big room there. And so I am hopeful that we will do good work, and I'm hopeful that it'll be something that the people will be proud of.
Well, it's possible that your tip line that you suggested previously, that might lead to some legislation as well. Probably not, well, maybe this session, but in the future, probably.
Yeah, that will definitely help us kind of how we manage our own members and the people inside the building, but then also the criminal justice aspect and how we navigate, how we approach those laws.
So we have time for one more quick question before we have to wrap up.
I'd like to hear how the panelists think on the topic of the impact of the Trump effect on the words he says and the way he treats women on our culture.
I think it's despicable. I don't know what else to say. He's a misogynist. There's no question about it. He puts down women every chance he gets. And I'm, you know, the sexual abuse claims against him somehow we've forgotten about, except there was one woman that filed, that it is going through the judicial system, that he called her a liar, and she's, I think, calling for defamation of character, whatever the term is. I'm not an attorney, but that's how I feel. I feel that he's the biggest disservice to the Republican Party as far as women are concerned.
I agree. As I said before, I think I would love to see his device taken away from him and thrown down and somebody stomp on it, so he can't do that anymore. You know, we've had presidents who were not what you'd call friendly to positive where women are concerned. Friendly, yes. Positive, no, where women are concerned. So we've had other presidents who did that. Historically, you know, you can read in the books. He's probably more public because he doesn't communicate directly through mainstream media. He communicates through social media. And it's a different type of communication. So I think it becomes much more public. That doesn't mean that anything he's doing is right, and I think it has. I think it will have an impact on the country. You know, it's not uncommon for the midterm elections to go favorable to Republicans. I question whether that'll happen this time around, especially with him there and with this last issue. I question whether that'll happen. It'll be interesting. I've been doing elections for years and years and running elections. I ran Barbara Vukanovich's elections several times when she was our congresswoman here in Nevada, and so I sort of study elections. I grew up in politics. My father was a politician, and a union politician, as a matter of fact. And so I sort of study elections, and I really thought this particular year would be the year of the incumbent. that we would see incumbents get reelected. I think we did see that primarily in the primary. Incumbents got reelected, and I kind of thought that's where this was going to go. I'm now reserving my thoughts on that to see if that really changes, to see if we see some kind of, something more than a blip. Some kind of change, because I think women will come out and vote, and I wonder if a lot of them who aren't historic voters, if a lot of them won't just vote for the other person just because they're dissatisfied with politics in America today.
Normally, the party in power, the other party, tends to do
That is
well
correct.
in the midterms.
Yeah, that is correct. So since the Democrats are not in power, theoretically they should do well in this election. But I just
They're not in power anywhere.
really, my sense was that this was going to be an election of incumbents, and I really am anxious now to see if that's true.
Everything that they said and echo it, but I would say that now is the time where I would challenge you and respectfully ask you to cognitively redirect yourself to what is happening in the state, because we have so much room for change here in our own backyard, and we have so much work to do. If we can get parity in terms of electing women, phenomenal, we need that. But we also need diversity in professions across the board. We need diversity in cultures across the board. No system of government is going to represent its people well if it's too much of one kind of thing or overrepresented in one kind of characteristics. And we have early votes starting soon. Sample ballots haven't hit yet, have they? No. When your sample ballot gets out, please spend time researching the names of the people who you will be voting for, because who sits in an assembly office or a county commission office is very important. And there are people out there who have said interesting things. There are people out there who've done amazing things. You would be surprised if, when you start researching the people who are on the ballot, you will know if they're the kind of person of the quality of character that you want to elect. Look at the judges' races. Really do that time and that homework, because as much as it can upset you what's happening at the national level, you have more control over what happens locally and in your own backyard than we will ever have over that national level. We will ever have. That fight will never end, but there's a tremendous amount of good work that can be done. So please cognitively redirect yourself and get your head where your feet are, get your feet where your head is. That's here in Northern Nevada, and let's see if we can do some really cool things here.
Just vote.
Did you want it?
And tell everybody else to.
Okay, well, this was perfect timing, so thank you so much for coming. Thank you to our panelists, and have a great evening.
Oh, I will actually, just a quick plug, when you're educating yourself on the candidates, rgj.com, we do cover the races, so you can go to that website and find out who's running.
And Anjanette is one of the, if not the best reporter at the RJG.
True, very true.